As we begin our discussion of the early Renaissance, I think it's pretty important that you guys start with an awareness of what the artists, the architects, the philosophers, the thinkers of this time period, what values they held, what they were trying to achieve in their art and their architecture, and where those ideas came from originally. Now, the Renaissance is a time period roughly begins in around the 1420s in Europe. And the Renaissance itself, the word Renaissance means rebirth. And so what Europe was experiencing during the 15th century was a rebirth, a reawakening of ideas, of learning. Europe had just emerged from the Dark Ages, from the plague, from a lack of literacy, from a lack of books, a lack of knowledge, and was finding itself confronted with new ideas, and some ideas that maybe that weren't so new but went back to the classical past. And so as we start talking about the early Renaissance, I feel like it's really important that you kind of ground yourself in what the Renaissance values were. And so I'm going to give you two examples here that you can see. On the left, you have a painting by Masaccio, and this is Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden from the book of Genesis. They had sinned against God. They had done the one thing God asked them not to do, and so he had kicked them out of paradise. And this is the moment that they are being kicked out. And so one of the things that I want you to notice is the attempts by Masaccio to paint real live humans and real live emotions. He doesn't just put an idealized image of Adam and Eve. He paints them as real people and tries to capture in his way what he feels that their emotions would have been at the moment when they were kicked out of the garden. Shame, dismay, guilt, sort of like, oh my goodness, what have I just done? And that's one of the things that we'll see in Renaissance artists, that sense of trying to convey and create the notion of real people experiencing real things. There becomes a great concentration on the individual, on the human idea, and the human ideal. Now, another thing you might notice about this painting is the way that the figures are arranged. They are arranged in a pyramid type configuration. Adam and Eve are at the bottom of the pyramid, and you see the angel at the apex. This triangular arrangement is something that we will see again and again in Renaissance painting. Renaissance artists were very interested in math, in mathematical proportion, in mathematical perfection. And so you will see this geometric shape, this pyramidal configuration over and over. Typically, at the top of the pyramid will be some sort of divine figure, whether it's an angel, whether it's a goddess, whether it is Mary or Jesus. That figure, that spiritual figure, will be at the top of the pyramid. Another way that you can see they're concerned for math is the balance and the proportion of their work. Typically, you can draw a line, a vertical line, right down the middle of a Renaissance painting, and there will be the same amount of stuff, objects, details on either side of that vertical line. So they were very concerned with precision, proportion, treating a subject in a human and believable way. Now, if you look to the right of the screen, you will see a building. This is the Pazzi Chapel, and it was designed by the greatest architect of Renaissance Florence, a man named Brunelleschi. And you can see that same balance, order, proportion in this building. Notice that if you draw a vertical line down the center of this building, each side is virtually a mirror image of the other. So again, the balance, the proportion, the clarity, the simplicity of design is evidenced both in the painting by Masaccio and in the Pazzi Chapel by Brunelleschi. One other thing that I'd like to point out to you is that Renaissance artists, Renaissance architects, and Renaissance writers were very concerned with the classical past, with classical Greece, with classical Rome. And many of the ideas of that period are brought forward into the Renaissance. And so I want to give you what is called the classical ideal. The ideal that you can see emerging in classical Greece and Rome, and then that is carried forward to the Renaissance. The idea that existence can be ordered and controlled, that people have the ability to order and control the circumstances around them, that they are not merely some pawns in some cosmic game of chance, but that they can control their circumstances and their lives. And by the same token, that people can triumph over any chaos, over anything that they see that is troubling or confusing, to create a balanced society. And notice that word balance. Just as the art and the architecture is balanced, they strove for balance in their lives. In keeping with that as well, humans should have reasonable limits, be moderate, exercise moderation, and do nothing in excess. And finally, they had a very strong belief in the power of humanity, in the power of human reason, the power of human knowledge, the power of human potential. In other words, that there wasn't anything a person could not do if he or she set his or her mind to do it. So these are some of the beliefs and the ideas that existence can be ordered and controlled, that people can overcome their circumstances, that people should strive for balance and order and proportion. And as we move through this section on the Renaissance, I want you to look for these things. Where do you see balance? Where do you see proportion? Where do you see a sense of trying to control, a sense of elevating the human? All of these are very, very important characteristics of Renaissance Europe.